You have experienced the feeling of endurance because you think love comes with sacrifice. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, who am I living for? And if one day that person throws you away like an old item, will you silently walk away or stand up and expose everything? I'm Acacia, a small town elementary school teacher from Austin, Texas, in the final weeks of my pregnancy. Life should be a soft glow of anticipation, baby kicks, crib shopping. Instead, it's a suffocating slumber in the shadow of my husband, Derek, a smooth-talking investment manager who walks around Dallas like he owns the skyline. To the outside world, he's a success story. Sharp suits, a firm handshake, and a smile that could sell sand in the desert. But behind the polished exterior is a control freak with a temper that's not just simmering, but explosive. And me? I'm the punching bag he doesn't need to touch to get bruised. Our house is modern, sleek, with skylights and skylights. Every night I hear Derek's leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors, echoing. He held his glass of whiskey as he barked orders or dissected my every move. "You're hanging your head again, Acacia. Shame on you." I wasn't his wife. I was a trophy, a shiny little trinket in his impeccable collection, expected to light up on command. The tension had been building for months, but it reached a breaking point just days before my due date. Derek insisted we take a family trip with his parents to their lake house, 6 hours away from Austin. It didn't matter that I was a human balloon, wincing with every step, or that the doctor had told me to stay put. "It's tradition," he snapped, throwing his keys onto the kitchen counter with a metallic clang. "You don't get to ruin it." I tried to protest, my voice small against the will of his bulldozer. "Derek, I'm about to explode. I can't." He cut me off with a switchblade laugh. "Don't overdo it, Acacia. You're fine." His family didn't help. I remembered the first time I met them. His mother's cold gaze piercing me like a winter wind off Lake Travis. "You're not quite what we expected," she whispered, her lips barely moving, as if I were a stain on their pristine heritage. They didn't ask how I felt. They didn't care. They just demanded, and Derek was their favorite boy, trained to obey. So there I was, Derek forcing me to go on a family trip even though I was well into my third trimester. Sitting in his brand new Range Rover, the leather creaking beneath me as we sped down I-35. The air conditioning was on full blast, but I was sweating through my maternity dress, clutching my belly as if it might burst at any moment. Then it happened. My water broke, right there in the middle of the highway with tractor trailers roaring by and sunlight glaring through the windshield. A warm blast of air hit the seat, dripped down my legs, pooled beneath me in a silent disaster. I gasped, gripping the door handle. "Derek, pull over, this is happening." He didn't even look at me. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his jaw clenched so hard I could hear the grinding. "Are you kidding me?" he growled, his voice hoarse over the roar of the engine. "You're ruining the car. This is a $350,000 ride, Acacia." I stared at him dumbfounded as the first contraction ripped through me. The headlights of oncoming cars flashed in the darkness, illuminating his furious face. "Pull over," I pleaded, my voice choked. "I'm having a baby." He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as we pulled to the side of the road. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels, dust swirling in the red glow of the taillights. He threw open the door, lunged at me, and pulled me out as if I were a spilled cup of coffee he could throw away. "Get out," he roared, shoving me onto the asphalt. I stumbled, my bare feet scraping against the rough ground, my belly heaving as another contraction hit. The wind blew, cold and sharp, cutting through my flimsy dress. I hugged myself, tears stinging, but I didn't dare let them fall, not in front of him. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a woman being abandoned at her weakest moment? If you were in Acacia's situation, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe your words will help someone else in a similar situation feel stronger. "You're a fucking burden," he spat, slamming the passenger door so hard the car shook. The upholstery was dark and wet, and that was what broke him. Not me, not the baby, but his precious leather seats. He climbed back into the car, started it, and drove away, leaving me there on the side of the highway. The taillights shrank to tiny dots in the distance, swallowed up by the Texas night. I stood there alone, water dripping down my legs, the distant sound of a truck horn ringing in my ears. A clogged bike was a warning, I realized, that I'd been doing this for years. Silent, invisible, waiting for someone to see me, but no more. The highway faded into a flashing blur as the ambulance tore through the Texas night, its siren wailing like a demon on the plains. I lay on the stretcher, my hands sweaty, clutching the bed as contractions shot through me like thunder. The paramedics' voices rang out around me, quick, urgent. but all I could focus on was the stranger beside me, Maggie. She had appeared from nowhere, a coworker of Derek's who had stumbled along behind us and caught sight of him abandoning me on the side of the road. My husband also mentioned this name a few times, because Maggie was a colleague who often had disagreements with Derek at work. But strangely now, her warm hand gripped my cold, shaking one, anchoring me as the sterile light of the emergency room loomed closer. She was a lifeline through a storm I hadn't prepared for. The hospital was a chaos of white walls and beeping machines. The gurney rocked against the plastic as they wheeled me in, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like a nightmare. Maggie was close, her sneakers squeaking on the floor, her voice steady where mine was not. "You'll be okay, Acacia, just breathe." Her presence was a shock, a ray of kindness in a world gone dark. I nodded, gasping for air, my eyes locked on hers. She wasn't just a lifesaver, she was a mirror, reflecting the strength I'd buried deep. As the nurses hooked me up to the monitors and the room filled with the rhythmic beeping of my baby's heartbeat, Maggie leaned in close, her warm breath fanning my ear. "Do you want to change this?" she whispered, her voice sharp with promise. "I know more about your husband than you think." I stiffened, the words cutting through the fog of labor. My heart pounded not from the pain, but from the weight of her gaze. "What?" I whispered, my voice dry and cracked. She smiled, a glint in her eye. "I know, everything. Everything." The word hung there, heavy as the ivy drip into my arm. And suddenly, I was thrown back, memories I'd shoved into the corners of my mind, locked away like old letters I was too afraid to read. Derek's face came to mind first, the smug smile he'd flashed when he'd shown me his Columbia degree, framed and hanging in his home office like a trophy. I'd been crazy about it then, naive and dreamy, too in love to wonder why he'd never shown me the original. "It's in the closet, baby," he'd said, waving me away with a smile. He'd bought it. Then there were the late nights, his laptop screen glowing in the dark as he typed out emails, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Sometimes I'd shuffle in with a cup of tea, and he'd slam the lid shut so fast you'd think I'd caught him robbing a bank. "Business," he'd mumble, his tone curt, his eyes darting away. I'd known, retreating to the couch with my cold tea, telling myself that it was normal for a big investor to keep secrets. But it wasn't just the emails, his voice. It shook every time he mentioned his boss's name. It was just a quiver, a chink in the armor, but I heard it. "Mr. Grayson's been giving me headaches this week," he'd say, trying to chuckle. I ignored it, chalking it up to stress. God, I was blind. I once found a crumpled receipt in his jacket pocket, some seedy bar in Dallas, $200 spent on drinks at 2 a.m. He'd been working late that night, or so he'd said. When I asked, he'd sneered, brushed it off. "Client meeting, you wouldn't understand." I didn't push. I never pushed. I just folded the receipt back into his pocket and left it. How many signs had I missed? How many lies had I swallowed because I wanted the fairy tale, the perfect husband, the perfect life? Back at the hospital, the contractions came faster, each one like a clenched fist around my spine. But Maggie's words were louder, echoing in my skull. "He's not who you think he is," she said, her voice low, cutting through the fog. "I've seen the files, heard whispers in the office. He's a fraud, Acacia." Fraud. The word hit like a slap, waking me up. I looked at her, my breath coming in gasps. "What files?" She squeezed my hand, holding it tight. "Trust me, we got him." The room spun, pain, fear, anger, colliding like a Texas tornado. I thought of Derek speeding off in his precious Range Rover, leaving me bleeding on the freeway. I thought of every time he'd cracked his face more than mine. The pain surged again, but it wasn't the baby, it was the rage, clawing to get out. I was no longer his trophy, I was awake, and so Maggie and I worked together perfectly. The hospital room was a sterile cocoon, the walls closed in on the strong smell of antiseptic and the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor strapped to my chest. I lay there, sweaty and gasping, the aftershocks of labor coursing through me while my newborn daughter slept in a nearby crib. Tiny, perfect, oblivious to the battle raging inside my head. The pain had subsided to a low growl, but something fiercer was rising. A fire fanned by Maggie's words, burning away the fog of fear I'd lived in for years. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, eyes frozen, jaw clenched. This wasn't the Acacia who'd begged Derek to stop the car. This was someone new. "Enough!" I hissed under my breath, the word a sharp edge cutting through the silence. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a vow. Derek had left me on that highway, a disposable bloodstain in the dust. He had controlled me, taunted me, built his life on lies I'd let slip, and now he was going to pay. The rhythm of my rage pounded in my head. He had abandoned me. He had humiliated me. He was going to pay. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I was the reckoning. Maggie slumped in her chair, her phone lighting up as she scrolled, but she noticed when I shifted. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low, cautious. I nodded, my hands balling into fists under the thin hospital blanket. "I have proof," I said, my tone clipped, grim. "Evidence. About Derek. Emails, that fake degree, recordings," he screamed, admitting to things he shouldn't have. Her eyes widened, a spark burning behind them. "You were sitting on a gold mine," I sneered bitterly. It all came flooding back as I spoke. Evidence I'd hoarded like a secret shame. Under my bed, I'd hidden it all. There were emails he'd sent from his company account, emails he'd thought he'd deleted. Sneaky rants about cheating on filling the numbers. I'd printed them out years ago, my hands shaking as I hid them, too scared to act. Then there was the diploma, a photocopy of his Columbia diploma that he'd brandished, but I'd once found a draft of it on his laptop, half-finished in Photoshop, full of typos. And the recordings, the static from my phone, the late-night arguments where he'd taunted, "You think they'll hire me without that piece of paper? I'm smarter than all of them." I'd kept it quiet, locked it away, because I'd loved him. Because I'd been weak. Not anymore. Maggie took me home and pulled out the box, her fingers shaking as I turned the key in the lock. The hinges creaked, the papers rustled as I handed them to Maggie. Cornered, yellowed, but damning. "Take it," I said, my voice steady despite my aching bones. "All of it. Give it to his boss, his lawyer, whoever." "Blow it up." Maggie leaned forward, her smile sharp as a knife. "Are you sure this will burn him?" I looked her straight in the eye, unflinching. "I want him to fall. I want him to feel it. I want him to lose it all." The room exploded, and Maggie shoved her phone into her pocket and stood, moving like a soldier on duty. "I'll hand it in tomorrow. The board is going to have a busy day." I could see it. She strode into the gleaming Dallas high-rise, the glass doors closing behind her, stacks of papers hitting some executive's desk. Derek's lies would be exposed in real time, the fake degree, the shady deals whispered in those emails, the voice on the recordings admitting it all. Fraud. His career, his whole fucking world would collapse, like a house of cards in a hurricane. Back at the hospital, a nurse poked her head in, clipboard clattering. "Need anything, honey?" I shook my head, barely hearing what she said. My mind was elsewhere, on Derek, casually sitting in his office, sipping scotch and thinking he'd won. He had no idea the hammer was about to fall. I imagined his phone vibrating, his inbox flooded with summonses from HR, his smug face pale as security escorted him out. The thought tugged at my heartstrings, a dark satisfaction in my gut, Derek thinking he could beat me and walk away clean. I'd kept his secrets long enough. Now they would destroy him. And as the night fell, the hospital lights flickering overhead, I felt it, power, raw and unshakable. I was still in the hospital, holding my daughter by the dim glow of the nightlight, when Maggie texted me, "It's over. They took everything. He's going to die." My phone buzzed again, another message. The police are involved. I stared at the screen, thumbing the words, a slow smile spreading across my face. Derek's glass tower, his corner office, his six-figure salary, his whole damn identity was shattering, and I threw the first stone. The baby cooed unknowingly, her tiny fist curling into my chest. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're free." The next day, Derek was in his sleek Dallas office, the skyline stretching behind him like an undeserved trophy. He would slump into his leather chair, tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead as his phone lit up with calls he couldn't avoid. The board had the emails by now, smug confessions about faking the books and playing games. The fake Columbia degrees were pinned under their microscopes, and the recordings? His own voice, bragging about pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, would echo through some lawyer's earpiece. I saw his hands shake, his eyes darting toward the door as security filed in, badges flashing. "Mr. Grayson wants you out, now." His empire was crumbling, one gilded brick at a time, and I wasn't there to catch the pieces. It wasn't just the office. Maggie had lit a match online, too. She posted dash cam footage from that night, grainy but devastating. Derek's Range Rover stopped, him pulling me out, my pregnant form lurching as he sped away. Her caption was short, sharp. "This is Derek Hensley, investment manager, husband, badass. The internet did the rest." By morning, it had gone viral. Twitter, Facebook, even neighborhood apps where people gossiped about noisy dogs. The clip had racked up millions of views, the comments flooding in like a tidal wave. "What a jerk. She deserves better. Put this bitch in jail." My phone rang constantly, strangers tagging me, cheering me on, turning my grief into a rallying cry. Eric's name was mud, smeared across every screen in America. He called me that afternoon, his number flashing across my cracked screen like a ghost I didn't want to face. I let it ring, watched it vibrate on the hospital tray, each unanswered vibration a small victory. Voicemail came on, and his voice spilled out, hoarse, desperate. "Acacia, we can fix this. Don't do this to me, please." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that woke the baby. Fix? He'd left me for dead on the highway. He'd built his life on lies and expected me to back it up. I deleted the message mid-sentence, his plea cut off by a swipe. Too late, I insisted. He begged. I hung up when I heard his echo. The next move was mine. Back home in Austin, the hospital bracelet still dangling from my wrist, I sat in our quiet living room. Too quiet without his barked orders. The divorce papers lay on the coffee table, black and final, my signature slashed across the bottom like a wound closing. I called my lawyer the day I left the hospital, a matter-of-fact woman with a slow voice and a shark smile. "He has no place to stand," she said. "We're going to bury him." I sent the papers straight to his parents' house, where he'd snuck off after the company fired him. Certified, signature required. Let him open that envelope in front of his icy mother. Let her see the wreckage. The public shaming didn't stop there. His family's pristine suburbs turned against them. Neighbors who once fawned over them now whispered behind fences, shunned them at the grocery store. His face was on the local news. Dallas CEO fired in fraud investigation. The police were investigating his finances. The shady deals from the emails weren't just flattering, they were felonies. The handcuffs dangled, and I relished them. His glass house wasn't just cracked, it was in ruins. I leaned back in my chair, divorce papers still in my hand, and felt the weight lift. The air smelled different, cleaner, like rain after a drought. My daughter was gurgling in her crib across the room, and I walked over and picked her up. "He's gone, baby," I said, rocking her gently. "He's gone from us." This was me now, unbowed, unbroken, unbound. The phone rang again. Another stranger's approval, but I didn't check. I didn't need to. I was out of his cage, and he never scratched me again. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee, a heavy stillness hanging over the polished benches as I sat ramrod straight, my hands folded tight in my lap. The divorce hearing was a battlefield, and I'd come armed. My lawyer beside me, her briefcase stuffed with every shred of Derek's sins. Across the room, he slouched in a cheap suit, his tie crooked, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing the hum of whispers, and I felt it. This was my moment. Not just to win, but to erase him from my story entirely. "Miss Hensley," the judge began, her voice a gravelly drawl, "you're seeking full custody and damages. State your case." I stood, my knees steady despite the flutter in my chest, and let it pour out. "He abandoned me on a highway, Your Honor, 9 months pregnant. In labor, he faked his degree, defrauded his company, and left us with nothing but lies." My words cut the air, sharp and cold, each one a blade aimed at him. Derek shifted, his gaze dropping to the floor, a coward caught in the light. The judge's eyes narrowed, flicking to him, then back to me. "Go on," she said. So I did, every detail, every betrayal, my voice rising like a storm over the plains. The evidence was a landslide. Maggie's testimony about that night, the emails I'd handed over, the recordings of his sneering confessions. My lawyer slid photos across the table, me crumpled on the roadside, the dash cam stills of his taillights fading into the dark. Derek's attorney stammered, grasping at straws, but it was over before it began. The judge didn't flinch. "Custody granted to the mother," she declared, her gavel slamming again. "Mr. Hensley will pay child support based on his prior income, $8,000 a month, and $50,000 in emotional damages." Derek's head snapped up, his mouth opening, but she cut him off. "You made your bed, sir. Lie in it." I didn't just win, I obliterated him. He glared at me as they ushered him out, his face a mask of fury and ruin, but I didn't blink. "You're nothing to me," I said, low enough for only him to hear. It wasn't a taunt, it was a fact. I'd scrubbed him from my life like a stain, and the victory tasted like sweet tea on a summer porch. Clean, bright, mine. The courtroom emptied, but I lingered, soaking it in. I didn't just beat him, I thought, tracing the grain of the bench with my finger. I rewrote the ending. Back home, the idea hit me like a lightning bolt. I had a story, and it wasn't just mine anymore. Women reached out daily, texts, emails, DMs, sharing their own tales of being tossed aside, belittled, broken. I couldn't keep it to myself. So I bought a cheap mic, set it up in my living room, and hit record. The red light blinked on, a tiny heartbeat, and I leaned in. Hey y'all, I'm Acacia, I started, my voice shaky but strong. This is She Left the Car, a podcast about women who've been left behind and fought their way back. This is my story, and maybe it's yours too. I told it all, the highway, the lies, the comeback, raw and unfiltered, my Texas twang carrying every scar and every win. The first episode dropped on a Tuesday, and by Friday it was everywhere. Downloads spiked 10,000, then 100,000, then a million. Listeners flooded my inbox. You gave me courage to leave my ex. I cried hearing your voice. I'm not alone. The numbers climbed. But it was the voices that mattered, women like me finding their fire. I recorded more, late nights with my daughter asleep down the hall, the mic catching every crack in my resolve and every spark of my strength. They abandoned us, I'd say, the rhythm building. They underestimated us. We rose up. It wasn't just a show, it was a movement, and I was its beating heart. Derek's fate sealed itself while I soared. The feds had sniffed out his financial games, wire fraud, tax evasion, the works. Last I heard he was facing 10 years, holed up in his parents' guest room awaiting trial, his golden boy shine long gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. He was a footnote, a shadow shrinking in my rear view. Meanwhile, She Left the Car hit the charts, sponsors knocking, my name in headlines. Texas mom turns pain into podcast gold. I'd gone from roadside wreckage to a voice millions leaned on, my living room studio now a sanctuary of sound and survival. The final episode of season 1 aired on a crisp Austin evening, the city lights winking through my window. It's over, I said into the mic, a grin breaking through. I don't owe him a damn thing. Not a tear, not an apology, not a second thought. I won. I hit stop, the red light fading, and leaned back, the weight of it all lifting like dust after a rain. My daughter toddled in, giggling, and I scooped her up, her warmth a tether to this new life. The podcast played on phones across the country, my triumph echoing in ears I'd never meet. From a woman left to break, I'd built something unbreakable, famous, free, and finally me. If you listened to the end, thank you. Acacia's story could be your daughter's story, your sister's story, or even your own story from years ago. If you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever carried everything in silence, you're not alone. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had to let go of someone you love for your own peace of mind? Or simply share what in today's story resonated with you the most. And if you believe there's someone out there who needs a little more strength, please share this video with them because sometimes just the right story can change a life.